as he investigates these mysterious crystal-like fruits growing in his orchard. What he uncovers could revolutionize not just his failing farm, but agriculture as we know it. When scientists finally reveal what these fruits really are, he breaks down in tears of joy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Farmer Michael Chen stared in disbelief at the strange formation before him. There, hanging from an old apple tree in the forgotten corner of his orchard, was a cluster of fruits unlike anything he'd ever seen. They were translucent, almost like crystals, with a faint blue glow that seemed to pulse in the early morning light. The dawn mist swirled around the base of the tree, adding to the surreal scene unfolding before his eyes. For a moment, he wondered if lack of sleep had finally caught up with him, causing hallucinations in the quiet hours before sunrise. His family's orchard, nestled in the fertile valley of Washington State's Wenatchee region, had been a cornerstone of local agriculture for 3 generations. The Chen family had always been known for their pristine apples, particularly their Honeycrisps, which had won countless state fair ribbons throughout the years. His grandfather, who'd immigrated from China in the 1950s, had purchased this land with his life savings, transforming what was then a modest 50-acre plot into one of the region's most respected apple orchards. Michael remembered countless childhood summers spent learning every inch of these grounds, climbing trees and helping his father tend to the precious fruit trees. His father had always said that farming wasn't just about growing crops. It was about nurturing dreams and cultivating hope for future generations. Those words echoed in his mind now, tinged with a bitter irony as he surveyed what remained of their once thriving operation. The past decade had brought unprecedented challenges that threatened to end their legacy. Climate change had wreaked havoc on their traditional growing patterns. Unseasonable frosts damaged their blossoms, while summer heat waves scorched their developing fruit. The rising costs of water rights and ecological pressures to reduce their carbon footprint had forced Michael to abandon several acres of his orchard, leaving them to become overgrown and wild. What was once a thriving 200-acre operation had dwindled to barely 50 productive acres. Last year's harvest had been particularly devastating. A late spring frost had killed off nearly 40% of their blossoms, and then an unprecedented heat wave in June had literally cooked many of the surviving apples on their branches. Insurance had covered some losses, but not nearly enough to keep them afloat. The bank had been breathing down his neck for months now, sending increasingly threatening notices about foreclosure. Just last week, they delivered their most severe warning yet. If he couldn't make the next payment, they'd begin proceedings to seize the property. His daughter Sarah, studying agricultural science at Washington State University, had even offered to drop out to help save money. The thought of that still made his chest tight with guilt and shame. She was brilliant, top of her class, with dreams of developing drought-resistant fruit varieties that could help farmers adapt to climate change. The idea of her sacrificing her future to prop up their failing farm was unbearable. But now, as he stood before these otherworldly fruits, time seemed to stand still. The morning sun caught their crystalline surface, creating prisms of light that danced across the ground like nature's own light show. Michael reached out again, this time carefully cradling one of the fruits in his weathered palm. It was about the size of a large apple but felt lighter, almost weightless. The surface was smooth and cool to the touch, despite its apparent warmth moments ago. The fruit's translucent flesh seemed to contain swirling patterns, like galaxies trapped in glass. As he studied it closer, he noticed tiny, luminescent veins running through its structure, pulsing with that same ethereal blue light he'd noticed earlier. The branch it hung from appeared normal enough, just a standard apple tree branch, but where the fruit connected, there was a small cluster of iridescent leaves unlike any he'd seen before in his decades of farming. Moving closer to examine the trunk, Michael noticed subtle changes in the bark texture around where these crystal fruits were growing. The usual rough apple tree bark had taken on a slightly metallic sheen, with tiny crystalline formations emerging from beneath the surface. It was as if the tree itself was slowly transforming into something else entirely. The practical farmer in him knew he should probably call the Agricultural Extension Office immediately. They'd want to quarantine the area, run tests, ensure there was no risk to his other crops. But another part of him, the part that remembered his daughter's tearful offer to abandon her dreams, made him hesitate. The weight of 3 generations of family history pressed down on his shoulders as he contemplated his next move. What if these fruits were valuable? What if they represented a chance to save not just his farm but his family's entire legacy? The thought of government officials swooping in and taking control of his discovery made his stomach turn. No, he needed to understand what he was dealing with first. Michael looked around the abandoned section of his orchard. The crystal fruits seemed to be limited to just this one tree, hidden away in the overgrown corner where he'd stopped maintaining the land 3 years ago. Perhaps that was significant. Something about the lack of pesticides, the return to wild conditions, had allowed this miracle to occur. As the morning sun climbed higher, Michael noticed something else extraordinary. The crystal fruits seemed to respond to the changing light, their internal patterns shifting and swirling more actively as direct sunlight hit them. He pulled out his phone to take video documentation, but the camera couldn't quite capture the subtle movements and ethereal glow that made these fruits so remarkable. Making his decision, Michael carefully harvested 3 of the fruits, wrapping them gently in his soft flannel shirt. He would keep this discovery quiet, at least for now. He'd document everything meticulously, take samples, run his own tests. Sarah would know what to do. Her professors at the agricultural college had access to labs and equipment. They could trust her to be discreet. Looking back at the tree one last time before heading to his truck, Michael noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There appeared to be tiny crystal fruit buds forming on other branches. Whatever this phenomenon was, it was spreading. As he walked back through the overgrown section of his orchard, his mind raced with possibilities. Could these crystal fruits be cultivated? Reproduced? What properties might they possess? The scientist in Sarah would surely be fascinated by these questions. As he carefully placed the wrapped fruits in his truck's cabin rather than the bed, protecting them from any potential damage, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Whatever these crystal fruits turned out to be, they represented a mystery, a possibility, a chance at something new. For the first time since the troubles began, he felt the weight of despair lifting from his shoulders. Little did he know, this discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform his farm, but potentially change our understanding of agriculture forever. The crystal fruits growing silently in his abandoned orchard were just the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would test his courage, challenge his convictions, and ultimately lead to one of the most remarkable agricultural discoveries of the century. Michael Chen's history with Crystal Valley Orchards ran deeper than mere ownership. As he sat in his modest farmhouse kitchen that evening, examining the strange fruits under his desk lamp, memories of better days flooded his mind. The wooden bowl containing the crystal fruits sat on his grandfather's old oak table, the same table where 3 generations of Chens had shared meals, made plans, and weathered countless agricultural crises. His grandfather, Michael Chen, had started with nothing but determination and a dream when he purchased this land in 1956. The local farmers had thought him mad for buying what they considered worthless rocky soil, but Li Wei had seen potential where others saw only obstacles. Working 18-hour days, often by lantern light, he'd transformed the barren ground into fertile soil using techniques passed down through generations of Chinese farmers. The yellowed local newspapers from the 1960s, still preserved in the farm's office, told stories of how Michael Chen had revolutionized apple farming in the region. He'd introduced innovative irrigation techniques from his homeland, combining traditional Chinese agricultural wisdom with modern American farming methods. Those articles, now framed on the farmhouse walls, showed a proud Li Wei standing amid his first successful harvest, his smile as bright as the Washington sun. Michael's father, James Chen, had taken that foundation and built upon it spectacularly. In the 1980s, he'd expanded the operation, adding state-of-the-art cold storage facilities and establishing direct relationships with major supermarket chains across the Pacific Northwest. Under his leadership, Crystal Valley Orchards had become known not just for their apples, but for their forward-thinking approach to sustainable farming. But now, at age 45, Michael felt the weight of impending failure crushing his spirit. The farm's financial records spread across his kitchen table told a grim story that seemed impossible to rewrite. Production costs had tripled in the past 5 years, while profit margins had shrunk to almost nothing. The rising cost of labor, combined with increasing pressure from corporate farming operations, had squeezed them nearly to breaking point. Climate change had hit them particularly hard. Last season's unexpected frost had destroyed 60% of their crop, and insurance only covered a fraction of the losses. The changing weather patterns had made traditional growing seasons increasingly unpredictable. Pest control, once manageable with standard methods, now required expensive new approaches as insects adapted to warmer temperatures and longer breeding seasons. The bank's latest notice, marked urgent in bold red letters, lay unopened beside his coffee cup. He already knew what it said. The same message that had been coming with increasing frequency over the past year. 3 missed payments, and now they wanted their money within 30 days, or they'd initiate foreclosure proceedings. The thought of being the Chen who lost the farm kept him awake most nights, haunting his dreams when he did manage to sleep. His wife Linda, a high school biology teacher, had been picking up extra tutoring shifts to help make ends meet. She never complained, but Michael saw the exhaustion in her eyes when she returned home late each evening. The extra income helped, but it was like trying to fill a lake with a teaspoon, barely making a dent in their mounting debt. Their daughter Sarah's college fund had been depleted months ago to cover operating expenses, though they hadn't told her that yet. The guilt of that secret weighed heavily on Michael's conscience. The crystal fruits sat before him, gleaming mysteriously in the lamplight. He'd placed them in a wooden bowl his grandfather had carved decades ago from apple wood, and their ethereal glow seemed to intensify in the darkness. As he studied them, he noticed something extraordinary. Tiny, thread-like filaments within the translucent flesh appeared to be slowly rearranging themselves, creating intricate patterns that reminded him of frost on a winter window. Looking through his reading glasses, Michael carefully documented every detail in his farm journal. The same leather-bound book his father had given him when he took over the operation. The fruits maintained a constant temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of their surroundings. He'd checked this multiple times with different thermometers, and the reading remained consistent. They emitted a faint humming sound, barely perceptible but definitely there, like distant bees or the whisper of wind through apple blossoms. Most remarkably, they seemed to respond to touch, their internal patterns swirling more actively when handled. When he placed them near other fruits from his orchard, the crystal specimens appeared to pulse slightly faster, as if acknowledging the presence of their conventional cousins. Michael had never seen anything like it in his 4 decades of farming experience. His phone buzzed. Another text from Sarah. "Dad, is everything okay? Mom mentioned you found something weird in the old orchard. Should I come home this weekend?" Michael stared at the message, uncertain how to respond. Sarah had inherited his father's scientific mind and her mother's sharp intuition. Currently studying agricultural science at Washington State University, she was working on innovative farming techniques that could help address climate change challenges. If anyone could help him understand these fruits, it would be her. But bringing her into this situation meant potentially risking her academic career if things went wrong. What if these fruits were some kind of agricultural anomaly that needed to be reported to authorities? What if they were dangerous? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as he considered his options. As he contemplated his response, the crystal fruit suddenly pulsed with a brighter blue light, as if reacting to his emotional state. Michael leaned closer, fascinated. The internal patterns seemed to be moving faster now, creating swirling designs that reminded him of the aurora borealis he'd seen on a trip to Alaska years ago. In all his years of farming, through all the challenges and triumphs, he'd never seen anything like this. These fruits weren't just unusual, they were impossible. They defied everything he knew about agriculture, about nature itself. Standing up from the table, Michael walked to the window overlooking his orchard. The moon had risen, casting a silver light over the rows of trees. Somewhere out there, in the abandoned section, more of these crystal fruits might be growing, potentially holding the key to saving everything his family had built. But with that possibility came risk. Risk of failure. Risk of losing credibility. Risk of making their situation even worse. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin a more thorough investigation of the abandoned orchard section where he'd found them. He needed to understand the scope of this phenomenon before making any decisions. Was it isolated to just one tree? Were there others? What conditions had led to their development? These questions and dozens more raced through his mind as he planned his approach. But tonight, watching these mysterious fruits glow in his grandfather's bowl, Michael allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years. The spark of possibility, the chance that maybe, just maybe, his family's legacy wasn't finished yet. Perhaps these strange crystal fruits, whatever they were, represented not just a scientific anomaly, but a chance at redemption. Little did he know that these crystal fruits would soon attract attention from forces far beyond his small farming community, and the decision he'd make in the coming days would ripple through the agricultural world in ways he could never have imagined. As he finally began composing a response to Sarah's message, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the brink of something that would change not just his family's fate, but potentially the future of farming itself. The next morning arrived with a heavy mist blanketing Crystal Valley orchards. Michael had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities and fears about his extraordinary discovery. He rose before dawn, something he hadn't done since the farm's better days, feeling an urgency he couldn't quite explain. The crystal fruits had remained active throughout the night. He'd checked on them several times, watching their internal patterns shift and swirl in his grandfather's bowl. Armed with his father's old field journal, a digital camera, and various measuring tools, Michael headed out to the abandoned section of the orchard just as the first rays of sunlight began piercing through the morning fog. The scene before him was even more remarkable in the early light. The crystal fruit seemed to capture and amplify the dawn's golden glow, creating halos of light around each specimen. His first priority was documentation. Michael meticulously photographed everything: the original tree where he'd found the fruits, the surrounding soil, the peculiar iridescent leaves, and even the unusual crystalline patterns that had begun forming on the bark. He took soil samples from various distances around the tree, carefully labeling each one with its location and depth. If these fruits were some kind of mutation, the soil might hold crucial clues about their origin. As he worked, Michael noticed something he'd missed yesterday. There were faint luminescent trails in the soil around the tree's roots, visible where morning dew had settled. They formed an intricate network, reminiscent of mycelium patterns he'd studied in his agricultural courses years ago. Using his phone's camera, he documented these patterns before they faded in the strengthening sunlight. The decision weighing on his mind felt heavier with each new discovery. Standard agricultural protocol was clear. Any significant mutation or unknown growth should be reported immediately to the Department of Agriculture. They would quarantine the area, run tests, and protect the wider agricultural community from potential risks. It was the responsible thing to do, the safe thing. But as Michael studied the crystal fruits more closely, he saw something that made his heart race. The tiny fruit buds he'd noticed yesterday had grown noticeably larger overnight. Not only that, but similar buds were appearing on adjacent branches. Whatever this phenomenon was, it was spreading, but in a controlled, almost deliberate manner that suggested it wasn't some random mutation gone wild. His phone buzzed, another message from Sarah. "Dad, I'm worried. Mom says you've been acting strange. What's really going on?" Michael stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Sarah was brilliant, studying agricultural biotechnology, with a focus on climate-resistant crops. Her knowledge could be invaluable in understanding these fruits, but involving her meant potentially putting her academic career at risk if things went wrong. Taking a deep breath, Michael began composing a careful response. "Found something unusual in the old orchard. Could use your scientific expertise, but need absolute discretion. Can you come home this weekend? Don't tell anyone at school yet?" He hesitated before hitting send, knowing this message would inevitably draw her in. While waiting for her response, Michael continued his investigation. He carefully cut a small section of bark from the affected tree for analysis, noting how the crystalline properties seemed to flow through the tree's vascular system like luminous sap. The transformation appeared to be symbiotic rather than parasitic. The tree showed no signs of stress or decay. In fact, it looked healthier than it had in years. His attention was drawn to a nearby beehive when he noticed something extraordinary. The bees visiting the crystal fruit blossoms seemed to glow faintly after gathering pollen, their bodies carrying traces of the same ethereal blue light. Even more remarkably, these bees appeared more active and purposeful than others in the orchard, as if energized by their interaction with the crystal blooms. Sarah's reply came quickly. "Dad, you're scaring me. This sounds serious. I'm coming home tonight after my last class. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." The message brought both relief and anxiety. Having Sarah's expertise would be invaluable, but it also meant there was no turning back. As the morning wore on, Michael faced another unexpected development. The fallen petals from the crystal blossoms had begun affecting the soil beneath the tree. Small, crystal-like structures were forming in the earth, creating patches of luminescent ground cover that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the fruits above. The implications of these observations were staggering. If these crystal fruits could indeed be cultivated, if their properties could be understood and controlled, they might represent more than just a scientific curiosity. They could be the key to developing crops capable of adapting to the increasingly harsh and unpredictable climate conditions that had been devastating farms across the globe. But the risks were equally enormous. What if the crystalline transformation spread beyond control? What if the fruits proved toxic or triggered unforeseen environmental changes? The weight of responsibility pressed down on Michael's shoulders as he considered the potential consequences of his decisions. His phone buzzed again, this time with a reminder about his upcoming meeting with the bank. The contrast between his financial reality and the mysterious potential growing in his orchard couldn't have been starker. The bank wanted answers about his overdue payments, but here in his abandoned orchard might be growing something that could change everything. Michael spent the next few hours meticulously documenting everything he could about the crystal fruits and their environment. He measured growth rates, recorded temperature variations, and even set up his old wildlife camera to capture any changes that might occur overnight. The scientific part of his mind knew this documentation might be crucial for future research, or as evidence if things went wrong. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Michael made his way back to the farmhouse, his field journal now filled with observations and questions. He had until Sarah arrived that evening to make his final decision, report his discovery to the authorities and hope they'd treat him fairly, or work with Sarah to understand these fruits before revealing them to the world. Looking back at the glowing tree one last time, Michael noticed something that seemed to cement his decision. A small family of goldfinches had built a nest in the crystalline branches, their morning songs mixing with the subtle hum of the fruits. Nature, it seemed, had already accepted this mysterious transformation. Perhaps it was time for him to do the same. That evening, as he waited for Sarah's arrival, Michael made his choice. They would study these fruits together, father and daughter, combining his farming experience with her scientific knowledge. They would document everything, establish safety protocols, and only reveal their discovery when they understood enough to protect both the fruits and their farm's future. Little did Michael know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about farming, nature, and the limits of what was possible. The crystal fruits growing in his orchard were about to take him and Sarah on a journey that would either save their family legacy or destroy it completely. Sarah Chen arrived at Crystal Valley Orchards just as dusk was settling over the valley. Her father's cryptic messages had prompted her to skip her evening lecture on advanced plant genetics, something she'd never done before. As she pulled her weathered Honda Civic into the familiar gravel driveway, she noticed the lights on in the old storage barn, a space that hadn't seen use since the farm's better days. Inside the barn, Michael had transformed the space into a makeshift laboratory. His grandfather's old wooden workbench now held scientific equipment borrowed from various corners of the farm. digital scales, pH meters, soil testing kits, and a microscope he'd salvaged from Linda's classroom. The crystal fruits, still in their ancestral bowl, pulsed with an otherworldly glow that filled the barn with shifting patterns of blue light. "Dad?" Sarah called out, her voice mixing with the subtle humming emanating from the fruits. Michael emerged from behind a stack of storage crates, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm she hadn't seen in years. Without saying a word, he led her to the workbench and gestured toward the bowl. Sarah's scientific training kicked in immediately. She pulled out her notebook and began documenting everything she observed. The fruit's crystalline structure defied conventional botanical classifications. Their cellular arrangement, visible through the translucent flesh, seemed to flow like liquid crystal displays while maintaining solid form. "Have you taken any samples yet?" she asked, already reaching for her field testing kit. Michael shook his head, explaining his reluctance to damage any of the specimens until he understood them better. Sarah nodded approvingly. Her father's cautious approach aligned with proper scientific methodology. Together, they began a series of careful experiments. Sarah used her university training to establish proper protocols for each test. They started with non-invasive measurements, temperature readings, light emission patterns, response to various wavelengths of light, and electromagnetic field detection. The results were astounding. The crystal fruits maintained a constant internal temperature regardless of their environment, suggesting some form of self-regulation. They responded to light in ways that seemed almost intentional, their internal patterns shifting to maximize absorption of useful wavelengths while reflecting harmful ones. "Dad, these readings, they're impossible," Sarah whispered, checking her instruments for the third time. The fruits were emitting a faint but measurable electromagnetic field, one that pulsed in rhythm with their internal movements. Even more remarkably, the fields of different fruits appeared to synchronize when brought close together. As they worked through the night, Sarah's initial skepticism transformed into growing excitement. Her years of studying agricultural biotechnology had taught her about the theoretical limits of plant adaptation, but these fruits seemed to bypass those limitations entirely. They represented something entirely new, not just a mutation, but perhaps an evolutionary leap. Michael shared his observations from the abandoned orchard, the luminescent soil patterns, the energized bees, the rapid growth of new crystal formations. Sarah's scientific mind raced with possibilities. If these properties could be understood and replicated, they might represent a solution to multiple agricultural challenges: climate resilience, pest resistance, enhanced nutrient uptake. Around midnight, Linda brought them coffee and sandwiches, watching with quiet pride as father and daughter worked in seamless coordination. She'd always known Sarah had inherited both Michael's farming instincts and her own scientific curiosity. Seeing them together like this, she felt a surge of hope for their farm's future. Sarah set up her laptop and began cross-referencing their observations with known botanical phenomena. Nothing in the scientific literature came close to describing what they were seeing. The crystal fruit's properties seemed to combine aspects of both plant and mineral growth, creating something entirely unique. "We need to document everything properly," Sarah insisted, creating detailed spreadsheets and measurement protocols. "If we're going to understand these fruits, we need consistent data." Michael agreed, recognizing that his daughter's methodical approach would be crucial for their investigation. They established a rigorous testing schedule. Every hour they would record temperature, light emission patterns, and growth measurements. Sarah set up time-lapse photography to capture the fruit's development, while Michael continued monitoring the original tree for signs of further transformation. The night's work revealed several promising discoveries. The crystal fruits showed signs of accelerated growth compared to normal apples, developing from bud to mature fruit in just days, rather than months. Their internal structure appeared to be incredibly efficient at capturing and storing solar energy, suggesting potential applications for sustainable agriculture. Most excitingly, preliminary analysis of soil samples from around the original tree showed increased nutrient content and improved water retention. Something about the crystal fruit's presence was actually enhancing the soil quality, a finding that could have enormous implications for farming in poor soil conditions. As dawn approached, Sarah began formulating a research plan. They would need to conduct more detailed analysis, but they'd have to be careful about how they proceeded. Using university equipment without authorization could jeopardize her academic career, but standard agricultural testing facilities would require official documentation they couldn't provide. "We'll need to be creative," Michael said, understanding the challenges ahead. "Your mother might be able to help us access some equipment through her school's science department, and I still have connections with other farmers who might lend us tools without asking too many questions." Sarah agreed, already sketching out a timeline for their investigation. They would need at least a few weeks of solid data before they could even begin to understand what they were dealing with. The challenge would be maintaining secrecy while conducting legitimate research. As the first rays of sunlight began filtering through the barn's dusty windows, father and daughter stood together, watching the crystal fruit's glow shift in response to the dawn. The fruit seemed to pulse more strongly now, as if energized by their presence and attention. "Whatever these are, Dad," Sarah said softly, "they could change everything, not just for our farm, but for agriculture everywhere." Michael nodded, feeling a profound sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of their discovery was enormous, but having Sarah by his side made it feel manageable. They spent the early morning hours setting up more permanent monitoring equipment in the barn. Sarah's university background proved invaluable as she established proper experimental controls and documentation procedures. They would treat this as a legitimate scientific investigation, even if they couldn't share it with the wider scientific community yet. Looking at their makeshift laboratory, Michael felt a surge of pride. His daughter had brought scientific rigor to their family's farming tradition, creating something that bridged the gap between practical agriculture and academic research. Whatever these crystal fruits turned out to be, investigating them together felt right. Little did they know that their careful plans and protocols would soon be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. The crystal fruits were just beginning to reveal their true nature, and the changes they would bring to Crystal Valley orchards would exceed even their wildest expectations. 1 week into their secret research, the first signs of trouble began to surface at Crystal Valley orchards. Sarah sat at the makeshift lab bench in the barn, frowning at her laptop screen as she reviewed the latest data. The crystal fruit's growth patterns had become erratic, showing exponential increases that defied their initial predictions. What had started as a controlled phenomenon was beginning to show concerning irregularities. "Dad, you need to see this," she called out, her voice tight with worry. Michael hurried over from where he'd been examining soil samples. The graphs on Sarah's screen told a troubling story. The crystal formations were spreading faster than they'd anticipated, and their behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable. The original tree, which had first produced the crystal fruits, had now completely transformed. Its entire structure glowed with an internal blue light, and the crystalline properties had spread throughout its root system. More worrying were the tendrils of luminescent growth spreading underground, visible through the soil in the early morning hours. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, Sarah explained, showing her father another data set. The fruits aren't just responding to light anymore, they're actively generating their own energy field, and it's getting stronger. She pulled up a time-lapse video showing the progression over the past week. The crystal formation's growth had accelerated exponentially, doubling in size every 48 hours. Michael ran his hand through his graying hair, a habit Sarah recognized from childhood as a sign of deep concern. Their initial excitement about the discovery had been tempered by growing uncertainty. The bank's deadline loomed just 3 weeks away, but their remarkable finding was beginning to feel more like a potential threat than a salvation. Their concerns weren't limited to the crystal fruit's growth patterns. Strange phenomena had begun occurring around the affected area. Local wildlife behaved oddly near the crystalline tree. Birds would hover nearby for hours, seemingly mesmerized by the pulsing light. The bees that had initially shown increased activity now appeared almost frenetic, their hives producing honey with a faint blue luminescence. "We need to consider containing this," Sarah said, pulling up another troubling data set. The soil samples from yesterday show the crystalline structures are beginning to alter the fundamental chemistry of the ground. It's not just enhancing nutrients anymore. It's changing the basic composition of the earth itself. The weight of their secret felt heavier with each passing day. That morning, their neighbor Tom had stopped by, commenting on the unusual glow he'd noticed coming from the abandoned section of the orchard. They'd managed to deflect his questions with vague explanations about testing new growing lights, but both knew they couldn't maintain the pretense much longer. Linda had begun expressing concerns as well. As a biology teacher, she understood enough about their research to recognize the potential dangers. Nature has boundaries for a reason, she'd warned them over dinner the previous night. When we push past them too quickly, there are always consequences. Sarah's scientific training warred with her hope for saving the family farm. The data suggested they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple botanical mutation. The crystal fruits seemed to possess some form of intelligence, adapting and evolving in response to their attempts to study them. A sudden crash from outside interrupted their discussion. They rushed to the barn door to find one of their sensor arrays knocked over, its metal frame twisted as if subjected to intense pressure. The nearby crystal formations had grown noticeably in just the few hours since they'd last checked them. "We need help," Sarah admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "This is beyond our capabilities to control or understand. Maybe we should contact my professors." "No," Michael cut her off, fear evident in his voice. "The moment we involve outsiders, we lose any chance of protecting our farm. They'll quarantine everything, run their tests, and we'll be lucky if we're not charged with negligence for not reporting it immediately." But Sarah wasn't easily deterred. "Dad, look at these readings," she insisted, pulling up another graph. "The energy output has increased tenfold since yesterday. We're not just dealing with unusual plant growth anymore. This is something else entirely." Their attention was drawn to the original crystal fruits, still kept in the ancestral bowl. The specimens had begun to change, their internal patterns moving more rapidly, almost aggressively. The humming sound they emitted had deepened, taking on an almost mechanical quality that set their teeth on edge. Michael approached the bowl cautiously, scientific equipment in hand. As he got closer, the fruit's glow intensified and the humming grew louder. Suddenly, the nearest fruit emitted a burst of energy that caused all their electronic devices to temporarily malfunction. When the equipment came back online, the readings were even more alarming. "The internal temperature is rising," Sarah reported, checking the restored monitors. "They're generating heat now, something they've never done before. And look at these energy signatures. They're beginning to match the patterns we saw in the transformed tree." Outside, the evening sky had taken on an unusual bluish tinge, reflected from the growing crystal formations. They could hear distant dogs barking, seemingly disturbed by something in the air. The weight of their discovery pressed down on them both, along with the growing realization that they might have stumbled onto something they couldn't control. "Maybe Mom's right," Sarah whispered, watching as new crystal structures began forming on the barn's walls where they stored the original specimens. "Maybe there are some boundaries we shouldn't cross. Michael understood his daughter's fears, but the sight of the bank notice on his desk reminded him of their desperate situation. They had invested too much, risked too much, to back away now. Yet as he watched the crystal formations slowly creeping across his family's land, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces beyond their comprehension. Later that night, as they reviewed their notes and findings, a new concern emerged. The latest soil samples showed traces of crystalline structures far beyond the quarantine zone they'd established. Somehow, the transformation was spreading despite their containment efforts. "We need to make a decision," Sarah said finally, closing her laptop. "Either we find a way to control this growth within the next few days or we have to report it. The risk is becoming too great." The words hung heavy in the air between them, along with the unspoken acknowledgement that either choice could mean the end of Crystal Valley Orchards. Little did they know, their window for making that decision was rapidly closing. The crystal fruits had begun a transformation that would soon spiral beyond anyone's ability to contain or control, forcing them to face consequences they could never have anticipated. As they locked up the barn that night, both father and daughter felt the weight of their situation. The crystal fruits glowed behind them, their light casting long shadows across the ground. What had started as a miracle, a possible salvation for their family's legacy, now loomed over them like a beautiful but potentially devastating storm on the horizon. The choice they would make in the coming days would determine not just their own fate, but potentially the future of agriculture itself. As they walked back to the house, the crystal fruit's humming seemed to follow them, a constant reminder of the power they had unleashed and their growing inability to control it. The crisis began with a piercing headache. Michael woke one morning to find the world spinning, his vision blurred by pulsing lights that matched the rhythm of the crystal fruits. At first, he tried to dismiss it as stress and lack of sleep, but when he attempted to stand, his legs buckled beneath him. Linda found him collapsed on the bedroom floor, his skin giving off a faint bluish glow. The previous night had been spent in the barn with Sarah, documenting increasingly troubling changes in their crystal specimens. The fruits had begun emitting stronger electromagnetic pulses, and the original tree had grown almost unrecognizable, its entire structure now a complex network of crystalline formations that pulsed with internal light. "We need to get you to a hospital," Linda insisted, already reaching for her phone. But Michael grabbed her wrist, his eyes wide with panic. "No hospitals," he gasped. "They'll ask questions. They'll want to know what caused this. We can't risk it." His voice was strained, and Linda noticed with horror that the veins in his neck had taken on the same faint luminescence as the crystal fruits. Sarah rushed in, having heard the commotion from her old bedroom where she'd been analyzing data. The moment she saw her father, her scientific detachment crumbled. "Dad, what happened? How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" She pulled out a small spectrometer from her pocket. She'd taken to carrying monitoring equipment everywhere lately. The readings from Michael's body sent a chill down her spine. He was emanating the same type of energy signature as the crystal fruits, though at a much lower intensity. Somehow, prolonged exposure to the specimens had begun affecting him at a cellular level. Outside, the situation was deteriorating just as rapidly. The crystal growth had spread beyond their containment area, reaching the edges of their active orchards. Regular apple trees near the affected zone had begun showing signs of transformation, their leaves taking on an iridescent sheen. The morning sun revealed patches of crystalline structures spreading across the ground like frozen waves. Linda took charge of the situation. "Sarah, call Dr. Reynolds. He's known your father since you were little. Maybe he can examine him discreetly." She turned to Michael, who had managed to prop himself up against the bed. "And you're going to let him help you whether you like it or not." But their plans were interrupted by an urgent pounding at the front door. Tom, their closest neighbor, stood on the porch with a worried expression. "Michael, you need to see this." He pointed toward the property line between their farms. A line of crystalline growth had crossed the boundary, spreading into Tom's wheat field. The stalks touched by the formation had begun to transform, taking on the same otherworldly properties as the crystal fruits. Sarah's phone buzzed. An email from her academic advisor. Her prolonged absence from classes had been noticed, and questions were being raised about her recent withdrawal from key research projects. The tone of the message was clear. Return to campus immediately, or face disciplinary action. Back inside, Michael's condition was worsening. His temperature had dropped well below normal, and the blue luminescence had spread to his hands and face. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about the fruits and their patterns. Linda sat beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, while Sarah frantically cross-referenced his symptoms with every scientific database she could access. The sound of vehicles on their driveway drew their attention. Several trucks from the county agricultural department had pulled up, likely responding to reports from neighboring farms. Men in official uniforms were already walking toward the affected areas, their faces showing clear concern at what they were witnessing. "We're out of time," Sarah whispered, watching through the window. "They're going to find everything." She rushed to gather their research notes and data, knowing they needed to preserve their findings if there was any hope of understanding what was happening to her father. Linda intercepted a county official at the door, trying to buy them time. But the man's questions were direct and increasingly suspicious. Reports had come in about unusual light phenomena, unexplained crop transformations, and disturbed wildlife patterns. They had a duty to investigate. In their makeshift lab, the original crystal fruits had begun to change again. The humble wooden bowl that had held them since their discovery had started to crystallize, the transformation spreading across its surface like frost on a window. The humming sound they emitted had grown louder, more insistent, as if demanding attention. Michael's condition continued to deteriorate. His skin had become almost translucent in places, showing traces of crystalline patterns forming beneath the surface. Dr. Reynolds, when he finally arrived, was shocked by what he saw. "This is beyond anything in medical science," he admitted, his professional composure shaken. "He needs a hospital, proper tests." But even as he spoke, they all knew it was impossible. The moment Michael was admitted to a hospital, authorities would be notified. The crystal fruits, their research, everything would be exposed. Their family's legacy would be destroyed in a different way than they'd feared. Sarah's laptop chimed with new data from their monitoring equipment. The crystal formations were now spreading at an exponential rate, far faster than their previous calculations had suggested possible. At this rate, the entire orchard would be transformed within days. The county officials outside had begun setting up a quarantine perimeter. Their radio chatter, drifting through open windows, spoke of calling in state and federal authorities. Words like containment and potential hazard floated on the morning air. Linda sat between her husband's bedside and the window, watching their world unravel from both sides. The farm they'd fought so hard to save was slipping away, transformed by forces they'd unleashed but couldn't control. And now Michael, the heart of their family, lay changed and failing before their eyes. Sarah worked desperately at her computer, trying to find patterns in their data that might explain her father's condition. The crystal fruits had seemed so promising at first, a miracle that could save their farm. Now they threatened to destroy everything. The farm, their family, their future. "I should have stopped this," she whispered, tears falling onto her keyboard. "I should have known it was too good to be true." Linda touched her daughter's shoulder, sharing in her pain, but knowing recrimination wouldn't help them now. Outside, the crystal formations continued their inexorable spread, their blue glow visible even in the morning light. The transformed trees swayed without wind, their crystalline branches creating an ethereal chiming sound that carried across the valley. What had seemed beautiful now felt ominous, a reminder of their hubris in thinking they could control such power. The crisis had reached its breaking point. With Michael incapacitated, authorities closing in, and the crystal transformation spreading unchecked, they faced an impossible choice: reveal everything and hope for help, or continue trying to handle it alone and risk losing everything, including Michael's life. Little did they know the true extent of their crisis was still unfolding. The crystal fruits had begun a chain reaction that would force them to make decisions they never imagined possible, and the consequences would reach far beyond their small family farm. Dr. Amanda Torres hadn't planned to visit Crystal Valley that morning. As the state's leading botanical pathologist, her schedule was typically filled with university research and agricultural consultations. But when her old college roommate Michael Chen called in tears, describing symptoms that defied medical explanation, she knew she had to come. Arriving at Crystal Valley Orchards, Amanda was struck by the ethereal scene before her. The morning sun caught the crystalline formations, creating rainbow refractions that danced across the landscape. County officials had established a perimeter, but seemed hesitant to approach the transformed areas. Their standard protocols offered no guidance for handling luminescent trees and glowing soil. "Linda?" she called out, approaching the farmhouse. Her friend emerged, looking exhausted but relieved to see a familiar face. Behind her came Sarah, whom Amanda recognized from university conferences where the young woman had presented her research on climate-resistant agriculture. "Thank God you're here," Linda whispered, pulling her inside. "Michael's condition is getting worse, and we don't know who else to trust." They led Amanda upstairs, where Michael lay in a state of semi-consciousness, his skin emanating a faint blue glow that pulsed in rhythm with his breathing. Amanda's scientific mind began cataloging symptoms immediately. The crystalline patterns beneath his skin matched samples she'd studied in her work on cellular transformation in plants, but seeing similar structures in human tissue was unprecedented and, theoretically, impossible. "Show me everything she around. They're pulling equipment from her bag. "Your research, your data, all of it. If we're going to help Michael, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Sarah nodded, leading her to their makeshift lab in the barn. As they reviewed the data, Amanda's expression shifted from concern to fascination. "This isn't just a mutation," she said, examining their latest readings. "These crystal formations are creating entirely new cellular structures. They're not destroying the original tissue, they're enhancing it, making it more efficient at energy processing and storage." A commotion outside drew their attention. Tom, the neighbor who'd first noticed the spread onto his land, was arguing with county officials. But instead of demanding action against the Chens, he was defending them. "These folks have worked this land for generations," they heard him say. "If something's wrong, they deserve a chance to make it right." Other neighbors began arriving, drawn by the unusual activity. Instead of panic, many showed curiosity and concern. Word of Michael's condition had spread through the community's grapevine, and people who'd known the Chen family for years weren't about to let them face this crisis alone. Maria Rodriguez, who ran the local agricultural supply store, pushed through the county's perimeter with boxes of specialized testing equipment. "My cousin works for a research lab," she explained. "He sent these over as soon as I told him what was happening. No questions asked." Amanda quickly organized the gathered neighbors into research teams. Her reputation in the scientific community lent legitimacy to their efforts, keeping the county officials at bay while they worked to understand the situation. Sarah's extensive documentation proved invaluable as they began correlating data. "Look at this," Amanda said, pointing to a pattern in their readings. "The crystal formations respond to collective biological activity. The more living organisms interact with them, the more stable their growth becomes." She pulled up satellite imagery showing how the spread had actually slowed in areas where local wildlife was most active. In the farmhouse, Michael's condition began to stabilize. The crystal patterns beneath his skin stopped spreading and his temperature returned to normal, though the luminescence remained. Linda sat beside him, holding his hand, as Amanda performed another series of tests. "His cellular structure has been altered," Amanda explained, showing them the results. "But it's not destroying tissue. It's creating a hybrid form that's actually more resilient. It's as if the crystal fruits are trying to adapt human biology the same way they adapted the trees." Sarah's laptop chimed with new data from their monitoring equipment. The crystal formation's energy signatures had changed, becoming more uniform and stable. "It's like they're responding to our presence," she said. "All these people working together, studying them instead of fearing them. It's affecting their behavior." Tom appeared at the barn door with more news. Other farmers from the valley had arrived, bringing their own equipment and expertise. Someone had contacted Dr. James Wilson, a retired geneticist who'd worked with Michael's father years ago. He was already on his way. "The community's taking shifts," Tom explained. "We've got people monitoring the perimeter, documenting changes, even setting up a proper research station. Nobody's leaving the Chens to face this alone." Amanda smiled, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's what we've been missing," she said. "These crystal formations aren't just a biological phenomenon. They're a communal one. They respond to collective interaction, becoming more stable and beneficial when approached with understanding instead of fear." As if to confirm her theory, the crystal fruits in their original bowl began pulsing with a softer, more regular light. The aggressive spread of the formations slowed, and new growth appeared more structured, almost architectural in nature. Dr. Wilson arrived by afternoon, bringing decades of genetic research experience and a network of scientific contacts who could be trusted to help discreetly. His preliminary analysis of the crystal formations revealed something extraordinary. "These structures aren't just changing individual organisms," he explained, examining samples under a portable microscope. They're creating a network, a kind of living communication system between different species: plants, insects, animals, even humans. It's as if they're trying to establish a new kind of ecosystem. The implications were staggering. If they could understand and control this process, it could revolutionize not just agriculture, but our entire understanding of biological systems. The crystal fruits weren't a threat to be contained, but a doorway to possibilities they'd never imagined. As the sun set over Crystal Valley orchards, the scene had transformed from crisis to collaboration. Local farmers worked alongside scientists, sharing knowledge and resources. The county officials, seeing the organized response and professional oversight, had shifted from containment to support. Michael, now awake and more stable, watched from his window as his community came together. The crystal formations glowed softly in the gathering dusk, their light seeming to pulse in harmony with the activity around them. What had started as a solitary burden had become a shared journey of discovery. Linda brought coffee to the researchers working in the barn, her teacher's mind already thinking about the educational opportunities this could bring to their valley. Sarah worked alongside Amanda, their combined expertise beginning to unravel the mysteries of the crystal fruit's behavior. "We're going to need more help," Amanda said, reviewing their latest findings. "But I know people we can trust, researchers who care more about understanding than exploitation. We can do this right. Protect both the discovery and your farm." For the first time in days, hope felt tangible. The crystal fruits, still cradled in their ancestral bowl, glowed with a steady, gentle light. They had stopped trying to control or contain this phenomenon, and instead learned to work with it, understand it, grow with it. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The support that had arrived would open doors to possibilities they'd never imagined, leading them toward discoveries that would change not just their valley, but the entire world's understanding of what was possible when nature and human innovation worked in harmony. The breakthrough came at dawn, 2 weeks after Amanda's arrival. Sarah had been reviewing data from their latest tests when she noticed something extraordinary in the pattern of the crystal fruit's energy emissions. The pulsing lights that had seemed random actually followed a complex mathematical sequence, one that perfectly matched the Fibonacci spiral found in natural growth patterns. "Dad, Doctor, Torres," she called out, her voice echoing through the barn-turned laboratory. "You need to see this." Michael, still showing traces of luminescence beneath his skin but now fully mobile, hurried over with Amanda close behind. The computer screen displayed overlapping wavelength patterns that aligned with perfect precision. The crystal fruits weren't just growing, they were communicating in a language as old as nature itself, using mathematical principles that governed everything from the spiral of galaxies to the arrangement of sunflower seeds. "Look at the correlation," Sarah explained, pulling up multiple datasets. "The crystal formations aren't spreading randomly. They're creating a structured network that mirrors natural growth patterns. And Dad's condition." She paused, looking at her father's still glowing skin. "It's not a contamination. It's an adaptation." Michael's latest medical tests had revealed something astonishing. The crystalline structures in his cells weren't damaging his tissue. They were enhancing it. His cellular energy efficiency had increased by 300%, and his body's ability to process nutrients had reached levels previously thought impossible. Amanda studied the data with growing excitement. This could explain why the affected plants show such remarkable resilience. The crystal structures aren't just changing them, they're optimizing them, making them more efficient at every level of biological function. The makeshift research center they had established in the old barn had grown impressively over the past 2 weeks. Local farmers had donated equipment, universities had misplaced sophisticated monitoring devices that somehow found their way to Crystal Valley, and Dr. Wilson's network of trusted colleagues had provided expertise that proved invaluable. Outside, the transformed section of the orchard had stabilized. The aggressive spread had stopped, replaced by a more controlled growth pattern that followed the same mathematical principles they'd discovered in the original fruits. The crystalline trees now formed perfect geometric patterns, their branches creating natural fractals that caught the morning light. "The bees!" Tom called out from the doorway, excitement in his voice. "You've got to see what they're doing." The group hurried outside, where the morning sun revealed an extraordinary sight. The bees that had been affected by the crystal pollen had begun building new hive structures unlike anything they already in Beedtory. The hives were partially crystalline, incorporating the same geometric patterns they'd observed in the fruits. But more remarkably, the honey produced within these new structures showed unprecedented properties. Initial tests revealed it contained compounds that could revolutionize natural medicine. "It's not just adaptation," Dr. Wilson observed, examining samples under their most powerful microscope. "These crystal structures are creating a bridge between different forms of life, allowing them to share beneficial traits. The bees aren't just collecting pollen, they're incorporating the crystal properties into their own biology." Linda, who had been coordinating with other community members, arrived with news from the outer edges of their property. The wildlife they'd feared would be harmed by the crystal growth was actually thriving. Deer grazing near the transformed trees showed increased health markers, and soil samples revealed an explosion of beneficial microbial activity. "The crystal network is acting like a natural internet," Sarah explained, showing everyone the latest data. "It's facilitating communication and resource sharing between different species, creating a kind of biological ecosystem that's more efficient than anything we've seen in nature." Michael walked through the transformed orchard, marveling at how his relationship with the crystal fruits had evolved. What had started as a desperate hope for saving his farm had become something far more profound. His own transformation, though frightening at first, had given him unique insights into the process. "I can feel them," he said softly, placing his hand on a crystalline trunk. "Not just physically. I can sense their patterns, their rhythm. It's like they're trying to teach us something." The luminescence beneath his skin pulsed in synchronization with the tree's glow. Amanda's team had set up sophisticated monitoring equipment throughout the affected area. The data they were collecting suggested that the crystal formations weren't just a random mutation. They represented a new form of biological organization, one that could potentially revolutionize our understanding of life itself. "The implications are staggering," she explained during their evening research meeting. "These crystal structures aren't just enhancing individual organisms, they're creating a template for biological optimization that could be applied to any living system." Sarah's laptop chimed with results from their latest analysis. The crystal fruits had begun producing seeds, tiny, luminescent specimens that combined conventional plant genetics with their unique crystalline properties. Initial germination tests showed they were viable, raising the possibility of controlled cultivation. "We're reaching a tipping point," Dr. Wilson announced, reviewing the data. "These fruits aren't just a curiosity anymore. They're a doorway to something revolutionary, but we need to proceed carefully. The world needs to know about this, but we have to present it in the right way." The community members who had stood by them through the crisis gathered in the barn that evening. Farmers, scientists, neighbors, all had played a role in understanding and stabilizing the crystal phenomenon. Together, they began planning how to share their discovery with the world. Local agricultural officials who had initially threatened to quarantine the entire farm now worked alongside them. The evidence of beneficial effects was too strong to ignore, and the controlled nature of the current growth pattern had alleviated their earlier fears. As the sun set over Crystal Valley orchards, the crystal formations created a natural light show that illuminated the gathering. The fruits in their ancestral bowl pulsed with a steady, confident glow, as if aware that their time of revelation was approaching. Little did they know, the next 24 hours would bring a discovery that would transform their understanding of the crystal fruits yet again. The turning point they had reached was just the beginning of an even more extraordinary chapter in their journey. Michael stood at the barn door, his illuminated skin matching the rhythm of the crystal orchard. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now he felt a deep sense of rightness. The crystal fruits had chosen his farm for a reason, and that reason was finally becoming clear. Before we continue with what happened next at Crystal Valley Orchards, let's take a moment to reflect on this extraordinary journey we've been sharing. The story of Michael Chen and his discovery of the crystal fruits has taken us through moments of hope, fear, crisis, and unexpected miracles. But there's so much more to come, and what happens next will challenge everything we think we know about nature, science, and human potential. Think about it. How would you react if you discovered something that could change the world, but might also put everything you love at risk? Michael's choice to protect his family's legacy led him down an unprecedented path. From those first mysterious crystal fruits to the transformation of his entire orchard, each decision carried enormous consequences. We've seen a community come together in ways that remind us of humanity's greatest strengths. When the Chen family faced their darkest hour, their neighbors didn't turn away in fear. They stepped forward with support, resources, and unwavering loyalty. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest challenges can bring out our finest qualities. The scientific implications of the crystal fruits have proven extraordinary, but perhaps even more remarkable is the human story at its heart. A father's desperate hope to save his farm transformed into something that could revolutionize agriculture itself. Sarah's academic dreams merged with her family's farming heritage in ways she never imagined possible. And Linda's steadfast support held their family together through seemingly impossible challenges. What would you do if you were in Michael's position? When he first discovered those strange, glowing fruits in his abandoned orchard, he faced a choice that would alter not just his life, but potentially the future of farming itself. Would you have taken the same risks? Would you have trusted in the possibility of something miraculous, even when conventional wisdom said it was impossible? Consider the moment when Michael's own body began to change, the crystal properties altering him at a cellular level. Many would have panicked, but he chose to trust in the process, to believe that understanding was more important than fear. His transformation became a key to unlocking the fruit's mysteries. But at what personal cost? The crystal fruits themselves seem to raise profound questions about our relationship with nature. Are they purely natural phenomena or something more? Their ability to enhance and optimize living systems challenges our understanding of evolution and adaptation. What if nature has capabilities we've only begun to comprehend? Dr. Amanda Torres's arrival marked a turning point in their story, bringing scientific expertise and legitimacy to their investigation. But it was the community's collective response that truly made the difference. When faced with the unknown, they chose curiosity over fear, cooperation over conflict. What does that tell us about human nature and our capacity for adaptation? As we prepare to continue our story, think about the larger implications of what's happening at Crystal Valley Orchards. The crystal fruits represent more than just a scientific discovery. They symbolize the possibility of harmony between human innovation and natural processes. Could this be a glimpse of agriculture's future? The relationship between father and daughter has evolved throughout this journey. Sarah's scientific knowledge complemented Michael's farming experience in unexpected ways. Their collaboration reminds us that wisdom can come from both traditional knowledge and modern science. How often do we overlook the value of bridging such different perspectives? The transformed orchard now stands as a testament to possibility, its crystalline trees creating patterns of light that seem to pulse with their own form of life. The bees that visit these trees produce honey with extraordinary properties, while the soil itself has become more fertile than ever before. Nature, it seems, has endless capacity to surprise and adapt. What happens next will challenge not just the Chen family, but our entire understanding of what's possible. The crystal fruits have only begun to reveal their true potential, and the discoveries that await will force us to question everything we thought we knew about agriculture, biology, and human potential. Before we continue, take a moment to imagine yourself in this story. What would you do with a discovery that could change everything? How would you balance the responsibility of such knowledge with the risks it brings? The choices made by Michael, Sarah, and their community reflect universal human experiences, the struggle between fear and hope, between protecting what we have and reaching for something more. The next part of our story will reveal discoveries that none of them could have anticipated. The crystal fruits are about to demonstrate properties that will astonish even the scientists studying them. But more importantly, we'll see how human courage, wisdom, and cooperation can help us face even the most extraordinary challenges. If you're finding this story as fascinating as those who have witnessed it firsthand, consider engaging with our community. Your thoughts, questions, and perspectives add to our collective understanding. Share your own experiences with unexpected discoveries, moments of crisis turned to opportunity, or times when community support made all the difference. Remember, every great discovery in human history started with someone willing to look at the world differently, to see possibility where others saw impossibility. The crystal fruits of Crystal Valley orchards are more than just a scientific anomaly. They're a reminder that the world still holds mysteries waiting to be understood. As we return to our story, prepare yourself for revelations that will challenge everything we've learned so far. The next phase of this journey will take us into territory that neither science nor farming has ever explored. The questions raised will resonate far beyond Crystal Valley, touching on the very nature of life itself. Stay with us as we uncover what happens next. The crystal fruits are about to reveal secrets that will change not just the Chen family's future, but potentially the future of agriculture worldwide. Your presence on this journey matters. Each person who engages with this story becomes part of a larger conversation about innovation, adaptation, and the endless possibilities that await when we dare to explore the unknown. Now, let's return to Crystal Valley orchards, where a discovery is about to shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about the crystal fruits. The final revelation came on a crystal-clear morning at Crystal Valley Orchards. Dr. Amanda Torres stood in the transformed orchard, her scientific equipment detecting something unprecedented. The crystal formations had begun emitting synchronized energy patterns that perfectly matched Earth's natural electromagnetic field. It wasn't just adaptation, it was perfect harmony with nature itself. Michael, his skin still bearing a faint luminescence, walked through rows of crystalline trees with Sarah and Linda. The fruits now pulsed with a steady, confident glow, as if they had finally achieved their true purpose. What had started as a mysterious discovery had evolved into something far more profound than anyone could have imagined. "It's not just agricultural enhancement," Sarah explained, showing her latest data to the assembled group of scientists and farmers. "These crystal fruits have created a new form of sustainable ecosystem. They're not changing nature, they're optimizing it, bringing out its fullest potential." The evidence was undeniable. Soil samples showed unprecedented fertility levels. The crystalline network had established a self-regulating system that automatically balanced nutrients, water retention, and mineral distribution. Crops planted near the transformed areas grew with extraordinary vigor, displaying remarkable resistance to disease and climate stress. But the most stunning revelation came from Michael himself. His cellular transformation, once feared as a contamination, had stabilized into something remarkable. His body had adapted to process energy with plant-like efficiency while maintaining human characteristics. He had become a living bridge between human and plant biology. "The crystal fruits aren't a mutation or an accident," Dr. Torres announced to the gathered crowd. "They're nature's answer to our agricultural crisis. They represent an evolutionary leap that could help us feed the world while healing our damaged ecosystems." The implications were staggering. Initial trials showed that the crystal fruit's properties could be safely controlled and replicated. Their ability to enhance soil fertility and crop resilience offered hope for farming in even the most challenging environments. The crystalline network's self-regulating properties meant minimal human intervention was needed. Sarah's work documenting the entire process had gained attention from leading agricultural institutions worldwide. Her research paper, co-authored with Dr. Torres, would revolutionize their understanding of plant biology and ecosystem management. The Chen family's farm had become ground zero for a new era in sustainable agriculture. The bank's foreclosure threats were long forgotten. Investment offers poured in from ethical agricultural companies eager to help develop this technology responsibly. But Michael and his family chose a different path. They established the Crystal Valley Agricultural Research Center, dedicated to studying and sharing these discoveries for the benefit of farmers worldwide. Their neighbors, who had stood by them through the crisis, became partners in this new venture. The entire valley transformed into a living laboratory where traditional farming wisdom merged with cutting-edge science. The crystal fruits had not just saved one farm, they had revitalized an entire community. Michael often stood in his transformed orchard at sunrise, watching the crystal fruits paint the sky with prismatic light. His body's luminescence had become a reminder of humanity's potential to evolve alongside nature rather than against it. The fear and uncertainty of those early days had given way to profound gratitude for having been chosen to shepherd this remarkable discovery. Today, Crystal Valley Orchards stands as a beacon of hope for sustainable agriculture. The crystal fruits continue to reveal new properties, each discovery bringing humanity closer to understanding our true relationship with the natural world. And it all began with one farmer's courage to embrace the unknown, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles grow from the most ordinary places. As for Michael Chen, the farmer who once faced losing everything, he now spends his days teaching others about the harmony between innovation and tradition, between human needs and natural wisdom. His glowing skin serves as a living testament to the possibilities that await when we dare to believe in miracles, even in our darkest hours. The crystal fruits of Crystal Valley continue to shine, their light guiding the way toward a future where farming works in perfect harmony with nature's deepest mysteries. What would you do if you discovered something that could change the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that remind us that miracles can grow in the most unexpected places. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey. Until next time, keep believing in the extraordinary possibilities that surround us every day.